Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 19 of LogiCast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by LogiCast. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of LogiCast. You may recognize me or you may not, because yesterday I decided it might be a good idea to shave off my beard. Turned out that it wasn't, so I've moved the microphone up a little bit so it's not quite so obvious. I'm joined, as always, by my colleague, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
Oh, I'm enjoying the role reversal because last time when I did that, I got the whole comments of you might not know who this is. It's the same guy. I'm not sure.
I did take the mickey out of you when you shaved your beard off, so I deserve anything that's coming back in my direction. And we're also joined today by a very special guest from across the pond, Ben Ellis. So Ben, tell us a bit about yourself. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm a freelance cloud architect, 20 years of experience in software development and more recently on the cloud. So yeah, I'm a company of one. I'm focused on small businesses, nonprofits, kind of smaller end of the spectrum. I'm based in the Midwestern U.S. Largely, I've been a dark matter, quote unquote, developer to take something that Scott Hanselman coined, I believe. I've just been kind of doing my thing, working at companies and such over my career, and then just kind of recently became more involved in the community. I became an AWS community builder this past go round of new inductees. That's been really exciting. It's been fun. I think you guys have is it your first year or your second year as community builders?
Well, I've got a bit of a funny story on that one. I am a year one community builder for the second time. So okay. I actually have two of these things.
Okay.
But no backpack. Yeah, I don't know why, but I applied for renewal. I didn't get renewed, but they said, don't worry, you can reapply. So I reapplied, and here we are, year one community builder for the second time round.
Well,
yeah, it's just my first go around, but I did manage to win in the intro call, the Mug of Endless Energy, which is just ridiculous.
Sadly, I have no Mug of Endless Energy, but just like the Cubs, I also have two hats. So there we go. So well, it's great to meet you, Ben, and it's great for us to be leveraging this fantastic AWS Community Builder program. As you know, if you've listened to the podcast before, we're here to talk about AWS news. So every week, I curate a list of AWS news, which I share in my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I handpick a selection of those articles that we want to talk to you about in more detail. So we've got a selection of such articles that John, Ben, and I will chat about. And the first one of those is from the AWS Compute blog, and it is entitled Best Practices to Optimize Your Amazon EC2 Spot Instances Usage. And just one little comment from me on this before I hand over to John to talk about Spot instances. I noticed some other articles in the press recently that seem to be tracking Spot instance usage, and the fact that prices do seem to be increasing. So although it's still a very cost-effective way to run your EC2 workloads, like most things in life these days, it's getting more expensive to do so. So I guess it's great timing for this article in terms of how to optimize your EC2 Spot instances. But tell us a bit more about this, John.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because that's why I picked this one, because there's been a lot of bad press and a lot of noise and a lot of news about Spot instance prices going up, because historically they've been ridiculously cheap compared with on demand. Yes, the prices kind of moved up and down a little bit because it's demand-based pricing and capacity-based pricing, but it was always just stupidly affordable. Like, if your application could cope with just things going away, which, spoiler alert, they should be able to anyway, that's called resiliency, then it was a great option. But it's not quite as cheap as it used to be. So I think this is not good timing so much as suspicious timing from AWS, because they put the price up a little bit and then they're telling people how to get the most out of it. So they're not trying to stop people from using this incredibly cost efficient way of running compute, but they kind of want to bury the bad news a little bit, I think. So moving on from that, kind of me being a cynic and being very suspicious, nothing that they're saying in here is new. It's always been the case with spot instances, that you should be casting the widest net possible when doing your resource selection. You should be using as many different types of instances and instance families as you can possibly cope with. You should be using as many different AZs as you should possibly be able to manage, because they're AZ based, and so on and so on. Yeah, and it does say things like leverage spot placement scores and balance the fact that you can get cheaper ones, or you can have ones that are reasonably priced but in capacity pools that have got more capacity, so they're less likely to be taken away, and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's suspicious timing, but none of what they're saying here is new, really.
What are your thoughts on this, Ben?
I have not used spot instances in practice at this point, so I don't have a lot to add here.
So I did wonder, though, when I read this, was is it spot instances effectively selling off unused AWS capacity? So is the price going up because they've got less of it? Which is usually what happens, isn't it? Supply and demand, I guess.
I think so. The only place I've really reliably used spot instances is in backing in an EKS cluster, and had horizontal pod auto scaling, and then the instance scheduler as well. So an instance would just be killed. You'd get 2 minutes warning, but you'd have already spun a new one up, and you'd move your pods, and it was fine. Like, nothing really cared. That's the only place I've really used it. But yes, I think there's less capacity because they're building out less servers, or people are just putting more into AWS, so there's less spare going on, perhaps.
So what are they recommending then, in terms of optimizing your spot instance usage?
Well, it's like I say, it's very little new here. It's diversify your instances, so use as many different types of instances as you can possibly manage. Obviously, you probably won't be able to swap between 64-bit and ARM instances. Maybe you can't, maybe you can. Look at the attributes versus, rather than just the types of instances. So I need X amount of minimum CPU. Okay, what meets that? Spot placement scores, like I say, so it was these are less likely to be taken away from you. And then they've got a new allocation strategy that they brought out. Well, they'll do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, because there were 3 strategies before, which was capacity optimized, capacity prioritized, and lowest price. Now they've introduced like a nice little middle ground where they're optimizing between price and capacity for you. So they kind of want to draw attention to that, so that they're doing the legwork for you there as well.
Well, at least they're trying to help people to do this optimization.
I think one thing I would throw in there is, like, as you're looking at all the options for instance types, really be mindful of testing the different instance types with your workloads. Because I haven't used spot instances, but having just come through a migration project, my client had a set of servers that run an older version of Ubuntu, and you're stuck like an M4 instance was as high as you could go. M5 would start breaking things. So I'd say don't get too click happy or what have you going through the console and choosing instance types to kind of widen the net, and make sure that it'll actually work with your workload.
Good point. Thanks for that, Ben. Okay,
let's just update your workloads. Good grief.
It's easier. That's always the hard option, though, isn't it? Updating the workloads. Let's just fix the problem with infrastructure.
Right.
Choose your hard. It's something that I've taken very much to heart. It comes more from the fitness world, but running outdated things on old infrastructure is hard because everything's outdated. Upgrading so you can run on new infrastructure is hard because upgrades are hard. Pick one. Choose your hard, and eventually someone will make the choice for you.
Right.
Well, John, because you said hard so many times in that sentence, that's a nice segue into the next article about building CIS hardened golden images and pipelines with EC2 image builders. So we like CIS. We like to try and help our managed services customers align to CIS benchmarks, etc. So I'm sure that by building CIS hardened golden images and pipelines with EC2 image builder, that can help us along that journey. So what can you tell us about this one, John?
Well, as you say, we work with CIS kind of benchmarks for AWS quite a lot. And for listeners that aren't aware, CIS is the Center for Internet Security, I want to say. It's other standards of security. It's one of the two, probably security. And it says things like you don't have security groups open to the internet, don't have management ports open to the internet on your NACLs, don't put credentials on your EC2, that kind of thing. So that's CIS. That's kind of what we use them for primarily. Golden images is a way of building AMIs. So you have this is how we build an image, and then you can kind of build on top of that if you want to. And then you can deploy your apps and so on and so on. Hardening an image means things like, shutting SSH off of the default port and moving it onto port 50, for argument's sake. It's locking down common attack vectors, and it's making sure that it can't be easily breached in the event that someone does try and do something a bit naughty. So there's a process you go through to do that. It's called image hardening, server hardening. CIS have got some pre-hardened images, and then the EC2 image builder has some kind of ClickOpsy drop and drag solutions for adding additional hardening to those images or to any image. So you can kind of pick one that's pre-hardened, or you can pick one that isn't and apply some hardening, or you can pick one that is pre-hardened and apply some more hardening, because standards change, things change, and the image might not change quite as quickly as the re-hardening would change. It's quite interesting because, as I say, it's kind of ClickOps. So you don't need to be using Packer or anything like that. You don't need to understand Ansible or the command line or really anything. You can kind of just go through the image builder and go, yes, I want some hardened images, please. And it kind of does it, which is nice. It is. It's quite nice.
Any thoughts on this one, Ben?
Again, I've come more from PaaS and serverless backgrounds. I haven't done as much. I did go into the image builder once because of this previous client I've had that it wasn't real clear to me how to get started, and it looked a little bit difficult to use. But that's the only time I've used it. So.
Yeah, well, this is old cloud, isn't it? This is servers in the cloud, which is not really what the cloud is all about these days, is it? So. Right. This is a very we normally very serverless heavy, and we've kicked off this episode with full-on servers in the cloud, which is very unusual for the LogiCast podcast. So sorry to have caught you off guard with that one, but plenty of people still running servers in the cloud. Perhaps not the best thing to be doing, but if that's what you need, then
Well, yeah, I mean, what's the revenue numbers from AWS? I think 60% from EC2 still. So this isn't going anywhere by any measure. And if you do run workloads, have to run workloads, want to, need to, whatever, it's important that you do use secured images.
Yep. Hardened. Say it one more time, John, before we move on.
It's going to sound like the shipping forecast, isn't it?
Yeah. So, moving swiftly on then to an article that I think you do have some opinions on, Ben. This one is about getting data to the cloud faster with AWS Snowball edge devices. Now, I almost want to order one of these just because I think they're cool. I have no use for it. I don't have any huge amounts of data at home that I need to get into S3, but I just want to. I mean, I have seen one, actually. I've seen them at the AWS Summit and reInvent, but they're just cool devices. They're so rugged. You can put data on them and drop them, and the data will still be there. And they've got the e-ink label, which is basically a Kindle built into it for shipping, which is just cool, I think. But this is an article from Storage Review about getting data to the cloud faster with AWS Snowball edge devices. So, Ben, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so basically, this was a Storage Review, had a 100 terabyte file that they had generated that they were like, well, we want to keep this file. We don't want to necessarily get rid of it, but where are we going to put it? So I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to get a Snowball edge and bring it in-house and transfer this file. And I think they quickly realized that the 5 terabyte S3 limit was going to cause problems. So then it just became more play. So they thought, well, let's just generate, I forget how many digits of pi, 500 trillion. Was it digits of pi, just to generate enough files that they could split up and have 200 gigabyte files to load onto this Snowball edge. So they kind of walk through in the article how they order the edge, and then while the edge is being delivered, they prepared their files, and then once it came, I believe it took them, was it a day or so to do all the transfers locally?
It was a day or two, yeah.
Versus weeks and weeks trying to do it over the wire. And they ordered a second one for some reason. I never really understood what they did with the second one. But, $700 a pop, I think it was. That's not too terribly expensive, but I don't know if my wife would appreciate that if I had one to show up on our door front just to play with. So, yeah, pretty cool. I mean, who doesn't want to have one of these to play? And the cool thing is it's not just storage. I mean, when you first look at these, you think of it just as like a storage device, but it is an EC2 instance that you can basically have sitting next to your desk, attached to the cloud, doing things that EC2 does. And of course, they have versions of this that are more compute optimized as well. When I read through the
funny.
Oh, go ahead.
It is funny. Everyone sort of says, "I want to play with it. I want to play with it." You may or may not be familiar. Carl should be. The A Cloud Guru people did that for part of their training. They just ordered one and did a training video, and he put like a 1 GB file on it and shipped it back again. And what would they have been thinking? Like, seriously, the receiving people going, huh? But good for training.
I can't imagine 100 terabyte file.
Yeah,
you don't work at NASA.
Crazy. No, I don't work at NASA. No. That is rocket science.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I'm so used to saying it's not rocket science, but that is rocket science.
It is actually rocket science. I think it's quite interesting that they title this article as getting data to the cloud faster. And I don't think people realize this because they're so used to streaming and Netflix and, I don't know, in the UK, 50 or 60 megabit downloads. I don't know what it is in the States, but these kind of reasonably okay download speeds. But if it's more than a few terabytes, it is actually quicker, even just like across a LAN, to put it on a hard drive and walk it across to the other side of the building. It's just, people don't really get that, I don't think. So the fact that it took them a couple of days to move it onto the device, and then a couple of days in shipping, and then another couple of days in AWS's data center, about a week, I think, total. It would have taken months to move that, years possibly, to move that much data over a public internet or a VPN, or even a direct connection, because the internet isn't actually that fast when it comes to large data volumes.
Or reliable, for that matter, right?
No.
Make sure the file doesn't have interruptions that could cause you to have to start over again.
And we're nearly there. And oh no!
It hasn't had that happen, right? So one thing, reading this article gave me a little bit of a flashback, a little bit of a PTSD for I think it was the first AWS cert I took, was Cloud Practitioner, which I thought would be more business level, and I think it was that one that had a straight up, you've got this much data, is it faster to transfer it over the wire if you have this sort of connection, or through a Snowball? And so I'm doing the proctored test, right? And I've got the little notepad thing that they give you. I'm trying to convert all the bits to bytes and try to figure out the transfer speeds, and it got me a little bit of breaking out into a little bit of a sweat. But so.
Is that the whiteboard? Erasable whiteboard with pen? Is that what you get in the US as well? That's what we get in our testing centers here. You're not allowed paper, but you have an eraser. Oh, you're at home. Oh, yeah. You're in the remote.
Yeah, and they don't give you. I think there might be like a virtual whiteboard, but who wants to use a mouse to draw with a whiteboard? So I had just a little plain text editor to do all the calculations in, and just wasn't expecting that level of detail on the Cloud Practitioner.
Yeah, I've done both the home proctored exams and the test center, and we've discussed. I don't think we discussed it on the podcast, but I know we've discussed it on a number of occasions, John. And my preference is absolutely get in the car or on the motorbike and ride half an hour to the test center, because I've got so much clutter in my office that you can't see on the camera. But if I was to move it around, and that whole room check thing that they do, it would take me a whole day to clear all this stuff out of here just to get my room to the point where it passed the proctor check. It's easier just for me to jump in the car and go. And when you jump in the car and go to the test center, you get a little A4 sized whiteboard, erasable whiteboard with a felt marker that you can write on and erase it. So yeah,
and you get bathroom breaks too, right?
yeah. You get bathroom break. Yeah. No, you don't get one. No. That's where the mug of endless energy comes in, I think.
The mug of endless something else.
Anyway, on that note, let's move on to our next article, which is
Another bucket.
Favorites, the leaky S3 buckets. So you want to make sure, by the way, if you are doing that with your mug of endless energy, that it isn't leaky like this S3 bucket at Capita on this occasion. So, of course, the leaky S3 buckets are always a firm favorite of the press, particularly the Register, who love their sensational headlines. So the sensation is not as sensational as some headlines we get from the Register, but this one is entitled "Another Security Calamity for Capita, an Unsecured AWS Bucket." So we know that there's not much going on in the world of AWS when we start seeing more about leaky S3 buckets. So there was a couple of them in the newsletter last week. I think it's been a while since we've had leaky S3 buckets, but here there is another one. So tell us a bit about this one, John, because I know you had some strong opinions you were airing before we hit the record button on this one.
Yeah, so for the audience that's not based in the UK, Capita are a large outsourcing company that focus on things like government contracts and major department stores and that kind of thing. I have personal history with them because I looked into their graduate scheme and decided that I didn't want to work for them because I liked earning money and they didn't seem to want to pay any of it. So personal history. Right. So yeah, we haven't really heard a lot about leaky buckets lately, and I think that's partly because of the amount of work AWS have done to secure buckets by default. So that's probably certainly part of it. Certainly. I sound really convinced there. That's certainly part of it. However, this bucket appears to have been a little bit older and wouldn't have benefited from those, private by default, encrypted by default kind of defaults, because this is about benefit claimants. And again, for those outside of the UK, if you're out of work or you're disabled or long-term sick, you get paid by the government so you don't starve to death, basically. But this looks like benefit claimant data from 2019 through 2021. Right, so it's a little bit older, wouldn't have had the advantages of those defaults that have come through, but realistically, someone like Capita should have known better. Yes, okay, it's Colchester City Council, Colchester, mid-sized city in Essex, I want to say. I've driven past it a lot. I wouldn't necessarily expect a county council, city council to know very much about this. It's not their wheelhouse, but Capita should have known better. They really should have done. Doesn't really seem to have been a huge amount of PII in it. Might have been a bit, you never know. But yeah, they should have known better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's understandable how these things happen, but it's still, not excusable for a big company like that when you've got tools like AWS config that can be monitoring for those types of, if it's just a wide open bucket, or you can use, I think Macy would have fit this pretty well too, right? Because there's probably enough PII that's identifiable through the, I forget what they're called in the UK, but like the social security numbers, basically the unique identifiers for each person. Like that should have been an easy catch for something like Macy to know that that's there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you go down the article a little bit, it also starts talking about private pension schemes, talking about Capita as well, because again, same sort of problem. 500,000 active deferred or retired members' data was held on servers that had been accessed. So it's just, how is this being missed in this day and age? How is this being missed?
Negligence. Never go as far as to call it that, but
never assume malicious intent where incompetence is an option, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure there's nothing malicious going on here at all. It's just something that's easily overlookable. But as you pointed out, Ben, there's plenty of tools, whether those are the cloud native tool options or third-party tools that are very cost effective, that you can just quickly scan all of your AWS environments and alert on these things immedely. So there's not really any excuse nowadays to not know about these things. It seems that what's happened here is people just not paying attention, I guess. So
it seems to be, and I know I say firms of this size should know better, but it seems to be endemic to large firms. I don't know what it is, but it feels like a "that's not my job" type attitude is what's coming through, because it might have been KPMG, it might have been, no, not KPMG, but it was another large kind of consulting firm that had a similar issue, and it was the whole thing was just a complete farce, and no one took ownership, no one took accountability. There was no end-to-end viewing of anything, and it very much feels like big firm syndrome. That's not my problem. That's not my job.
I'm sure there are plenty of smaller firms out there with leaky buckets. They just don't make as sensational headlines as the ones that we all know. So they escape the press coverage. But nobody wants to be that next headline. So if you are listening and you are using S3 buckets, just run the tools, find the public ones, and deal with it if they don't need to be public. It's not difficult.
Which, spoiler alert, they don't. At no point do they need to be public. We need to serve media out of it. Use CloudFront. We need to be able to upload things to it directly. Okay, use pre-signed URLs. Talk to an architect. Talk to someone that's got a certificate in this. There is virtually no reason for buckets to be public at this point.
That's a great point.
Are there any reasons?
Legacy setups that you don't want to rebuild. That's about it, I think.
Back to that point again. Yeah, here we are again. Yeah. Choose your hard. We just wanted to get the word hard in again before the end of the podcast.
Was it hard doing all that shaving?
No, actually the act of shaving I quite enjoyed. It was just the end result that I was not happy with. So now I have several weeks or months indeed of trying to grow that back. Well, not trying; it will grow itself. But I don't need to do anything. I need to not do things. But anyway, so moving on. To the final article of this week, and this one is based on it's a Register article based on some comments recently from Gartner, and another lovely Register headline: Gartner, stop worrying and love the cloud with all its outages and lock-in. So there's quite a lot in that title, isn't there? It's kind of like you should love the cloud even though it's not very good, and we're all cloud people. So, of course, we're going to be here to tell you that actually it is good and you should love the cloud. But Ben, I think you had some opinions on this one yourself.
Yeah. So, speaking of hard, multi-cloud, as they're talking about in this article, is got to be one of the hardest things to pull off in practice. I think they actually mentioned talked about active cloud, which I'm not even sure how you do that across cloud vendors. Like what are the steps to go? If you're using relational databases, you can't really do that to begin with because you gotta have a writer node. DynamoDB is kind of the answer to that in AWS, but how do you do that across clouds? So anyway, active would be terribly difficult. But I think, the bottom line for me is how much downtime can you tolerate? So if 2 hours is too much, then you've got to look at something else, because even though he's in this article saying that, hey, just don't worry about it. There's going to be some outages. It's getting better all the time. There could still be an outage that takes the cloud down for many hours. I don't know if I had one that spanned a day or more, at least recently, but you're going to have outages. And sometimes that takes the control plane down too. So you can't even try to recover from something kind of on the fly because, everything's gone kaput. My first experience with this was when it was my first main application going to the cloud, and it was in Azure, and I deployed something. Of course, the customer didn't want any downtime. Their expectation of downtime was, we want 100% uptime, which, I didn't go into the details on. That's not really theoretically possible, but so they had high expectations for uptime. And 2 months later, lightning struck the South data center in Austin, and they just had cascading failures. It took out the whole management console. I'm assuming the APIs, the management APIs were down too. I was just going through the console trying to recover. It's gotten better for sure, and that's something he points out is that the data is suggesting that we're having less frequent outages and they're less severe and they're more contained to certain areas. But I think the pessimist in me, it's going to happen again. So what is your tolerance? Because at some point you're going to have to deal with it most likely. So if you're a big company, you can afford to possibly do multi-cloud. But if you're a smaller player, that's just not, I think, within the realm of feasibility. Multi-region is hard enough, let alone multi-cloud.
Let's be realistic. The majority of outages are caused by your own code, not by the hosting provider. Let's be realistic here. Yeah. When you're talking SLAs, and yes, that doesn't mean it's going to be up. It means you get money, but fine. When you're talking SLAs in 3, 4, 5 nines of availability, you're not, unless you are actually running your own data center and you are a god of running data centers, which you're not, no one is, you're not going to hit that. You're not, because they're just operating at a scale that you can't do. And especially with these, as you say, these smaller players that have historically run on servers in cupboards or under stairs or off of their laptop. And honestly, I've seen things like, this is running the production website. Do not turn this off. Sticky note on a laptop in the corner of a room. Like, what? You're not going to be able to get to that level. Those sorts of people aren't reading Gartner, in my experience. So it's an interesting take. But yes, lock-in is a thing. Just live with it, because, as you say, multi-region's hard enough.
Right. And then you can't take advantage of the best of the cloud. Like, we're all, like I said before, we're all big fans of serverless. Like, trying to do serverless multi-cloud is even another layer of complexity, because all the systems and APIs are different. So you got to deploy code to different, it's not really, not for the faint of heart, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get to the things like, okay, well, we'll just run containers. Where are you going to host it? Well, not in any of the three players options. So we're going to put it on Docker Hub. Where do you think Docker runs? It's probably in AWS. Get real.
I think the thing is, nowadays, when there is a cloud outage, it's so huge that half the internet is down anyway. So it doesn't really matter if you're down. You just need to wait for it to come back.
This was always my thing with, so do we need to be in more than one region? If London goes down, I'm going home. I don't do.
Yeah, I think there were a few highly publicized AWS outages last year, 2 or 3, but they were very short.
One of them, because there was this noise around an outage that took down the support center, because it was in North Virginia and the support center ran through North Virginia. So what did AWS do as a result of that? They re-architected it to not run exclusively through North Virginia. Genius.
Yeah. Some of these things you wonder why they weren't done that way the first time. But another tip here is don't deploy to US East 1, right? Deploy someplace else. That's kind of ground zero for any sort of catastrophic cloud failures, it seems like. So
absolutely. So yeah, as the register said, stop worrying and love the cloud with all its outages and lock-in. But on that note, that's really all we've got time for this week, which is a shame, because I was enjoying today's discussion. Thanks for listening. That was season 2, episode 19 of LogiCast. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining John and I today and giving your insights. And we'll be back next week with another episode for you. See you again next time.